We didn't even choreograph that. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Hello, Gwen.
So excited to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much for being here, Gwen, and thank you very much for showing up and not talking to us, but talking to these people, the Twitch chat, the people who are going to ask you questions.
Listen, you
Twitch.
know, I'm here in your virtual studio. I don't see those people.
No,
Give
we
me
do.
like, who am I talking to?
You are talking to a bunch of amazing folks on Twitch, and those amazing folks are going to ask you questions. Are they? So yeah, feel free to ask us questions. I guess Gwen and we are here to answer. So answer questions, respond to the survey stuff, and yeah. Gwen, I know Danny knows you. You are friends with Danny, but tell me.
It's a true fact.
Yeah, tell me who are you and what do you do and where do you join us from?
Yeah, so first of all, physically, I'm here in my home in San Jose, California. Lovely, sunny, great day here. And my current role is a co-founder of a startup that I actually started like 6 months ago. I have a fancy title, but I don't think it's very meaningful at this stage. You do what you need to build a product and get people to use it and make sure everything keeps working. So from documentation to production.
And you know a bit about the startup journey, right? Like this isn't your first rodeo.
I've never started that early.
Okay.
So previously I was at Confluent. So I started Confluent very early, but it was still good. I think 10 to 20 people there by the time I started. It was already like Series B, and Kafka was already a thing. So
right.
It was a very different experience. And then at Confluent, I had my own journey where starting as an engineer, moving on to product, coming back to engineering, leading Confluent Cloud, or specifically the cloud native Kafka part of Confluent Cloud. And then basically I did that for 3 years. You see everything that
You've seen it all.
difficult, interesting, exciting about taking a great open source project, making it into a great SaaS experience with a really good user experience was kind of what we're aiming, like not throw machine at the wall, but really making it something different, something better. So after 3 years of that, I was like, I bet Confluent is not the only company in the world that needs that. So we're now kind of trying to figure out like control plane for infrastructure SaaS and the data models and the data architectures below it and other generic things that every infrastructure company could build on, essentially.
Yeah, like we can operationalize off this, right? And like it can be an offering, right?
There's architectural building blocks, so you wouldn't have to solve, like the problems that you and I've talked about a lot, like you have events happening in the control plane, you need to access them on the data plane, stuff happening in the data plane, you need to move it back. And there's a lot of event-driven patterns that we iterated on, saw how they work, etc. And just bringing it and seeing that, does it work for everyone? Is there more we can do there?
I love that. It's kind of like data architectures as a service almost, right? Like it's in a sense.
And it's almost like an opinionated data architecture.
Yeah, opinionated. Yeah. And that's a really important word, right? Like, can you kind of unpack that for us and how you mean that in this context?
Yeah. So like if you build a very generic database, and let's take maybe one of yours as an example, you build DynamoDB. DynamoDB is very generic. Like what can you do with DynamoDB? Oh, everything. Literally everything. I cannot come up with a single use case that you couldn't solve with DynamoDB. So in order for me to use it for my specific use case, I need to learn a lot into how to map my problem into DynamoDB. And the same thing was for Kafka, right? I mean, yes, Kafka is very generic. You produce, you consume. But what if you need to do orchestration? What if you actually do need to switch the level of parallelism midstream? What if you do need some retries and out-of-bound processing? There is so many details that are specific to your use case that maybe nobody else needs, and the generic solution will not solve it, coming up with a platform that kind of sits on top of some stuff and really gives you those pre-mediated patterns for a specific use case. And in our case, our passion
like the data
is
product,
SaaS
right?
infrastructure.
Idea. Like that's, oh, sorry, go ahead. What was that?
Yeah, in our case, like our passion is SaaS infrastructure.
Right.
So we are trying to model that, but we can also see that.
So I've heard the term data product.
Right.
What's a data product?
Oh, yes. So it's one of those terms that everyone throws around, and more so. And then
You get a data product, you get a data product, you get a data product.
Something that I find happening on literally every time a term kind of starts catching on, everyone will give their own spin to it, and very soon the term kind of waters down and becomes
totally diluted. It's like data mesh, right? Like
exactly
everybody's talking about
like data mesh, observability. What is observability? Whatever my vendor is selling, clearly. So data product could be whatever your vendor is selling, but it can actually be a specific thing. So I'm going to go back to early in my career, and maybe before you guys even had a career. I think Danny may have been still in high school. 2012-ish. Danny, were you in high school?
Oh my God, what a compliment. Okay, all right. Well, gonna keep up on that skincare routine then, I guess.
I think I'm gonna copy your skincare routine. Please put it in the
chat.
Yeah.
Everybody can benefit.
Yes. So 2012 is basically when the term data product first appeared, and it appeared, the best that I could trace it was out of LinkedIn.
Okay.
Where they were really thought that, hey, we have all this data, how can we use it to drive a great user experience? Right. And if you look at LinkedIn even today, you'll see all those, recommendation of people to follow, and it will obviously be driven by data. It will also have some bits of data. We recommend it because you're in the same town, you work for the same company, you have 15 shared friends, and you can see like half of the website with like, here is how many people viewed your profile in the last week. So the entire user experience of their product is driven by data, even though what you do in the product is not about data. Like, you come there to make professional connections, but data drives the user experience. And this is where it all started. And LinkedIn built, obviously, gazillion tools around it, right? I mean, we'll have Pinot here with Tim Bergland soonish. Kafka came from there. There's Venice. If you look at all the big data tools, there's just so many that started. It's
one big happy data family, I would say.
Indeed.
Yeah, and this was really like where the big data revolution came from. Like, take all this data and use it to drive something meaningful without having someone really dig through piles of data and be an expert data analyst.
Yeah, and that's really insightful, right? Because like when I think about the history, kind of growing up, Oregon Trail generation over here, right? Like back then, I mean, the storage space just didn't exist, right? And then all of a sudden, like you had this amazing kind of evolution where storage became so cheap, so we just stored everything everywhere. We duplicated everything, then we deduplicated everything, then we duplicated everything again, And then all of a sudden it's like Moore's law comes into play, and we've got data everywhere, all over the place.
Exactly. The same goes for things that we talk about compute, right? It used to be very expensive to do on all the compute. All of a sudden it became cheap and everybody's doing all the things.
Then it became expensive.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it gets very expensive if you breach a certain threshold, but it is one of those things.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it gets expensive if you keep doing the same thing you did before. It's more that now that you have this seemingly unlimited compute, you kind of do more stuff than you did. And the same was true for storage. Like, this is what big data really was intended to do. Now that you have more, you can do things you wouldn't do before. Yeah. So fast forward 10 years to today, data products now no longer just mean that, even though I really, really love this original interpretation. They can mean internal data products. People call data products to their internal dashboards, which is like, okay, is Tableau a data product. Maybe people definitely use it as such. They also use it for the tools they use for internal decision making, which is actually closer to, let's not force someone to dig through all this data to analyze. Let's just give someone just the information they need to do a decision. Salesforce is an amazing example of that. They have lead scoring. I think it's driven by Salesforce Einstein, which not coincidentally was actually originated and written by ex-LinkedIn people that went on to Salesforce. And this lead scoring is essentially like for every customer in the funnel, like this is like it's a score, like green, yellow, 1 to 10 kind of thing. And then like 3 lines. We think it's a good lead because the company visited your website 15 times in the last 3 days. Like, so it's very, it just gives you like the highlights. And this is, again, fantastic experience. You don't have to dig through the data. It comes to you for your use case, which I'm absolutely in love with. And then when you go external, same thing. There are products that are a dashboard. I would say Datadog, the product is a dashboard. There is a product that has a dashboard to good or bad extent, like Salesforce, other parts of it, or HubSpot, which is a cheaper Salesforce and simpler Salesforce competitor. It will show you some charts. You can create like my sales versus that. They don't give you those insights. And then if you look at, do we have products that are like LinkedIn, that they use data to help you with decision making, but are B2B SaaS and not like LinkedIn and Facebook B2C? There's actually almost none. Like I had to dig so much to find the Salesforce Einstein example. And you're like, why? Why is that there is, like, if you think of data in the B2B world as part of the product, it's always those dashboards. Like you'd think there would be something more that people would do there.
There's a question, if I can stop you here, like from Zyker coming in, and this is something maybe connected to a lot of stuff you talk about regarding control plane as a service, right? Is this good for new systems or existing systems, or maybe both? How would you approach this?
Yeah, I definitely think it's both. It really depends. Do you need this kind of architecture? Some products absolutely need that because they have very natural, this is my data plane, this is where all the compute is, this is where the heavy data transfer, low latency, like this is where my actual business runs. And then here is a metadata layer where I need to do management activity on it, like life cycle, things like maybe request a new deployment, watch my bill, give permissions to something. And there's a lot of reasons to separate things out. If your data plane is very compute heavy, very data heavy, you want it to be kind of close to the users, you want it to behave in certain ways. And then if you have this kind of system, you kind of need a control plane, whether or not the system is new and old. So obviously, like Confluent Cloud is an example. Both Confluent and Amazon added a control plane on top of Apache Kafka many years after Apache Kafka already existed. And control plane, like we're obviously talking here about control plane as kind of SaaS product, but if you look at what Danny did in maybe previous life, a lot of people actually want the control plane in-house. Like they just have a bunch of stuff deployed still on-prem, and they
would you say it's kind of a natural? So would you say it's kind of a natural progression then, right? Like as various like companies mature, that this kind of gets adopted, or how do you see that?
I would say that I'm seeing a lot of people thinking about it very early on now, like as a very basic architectural concept.
And that's a big shift from a few years back.
Yeah, and I think it again goes back to almost, you just showed this poll where it says user experience is the most important thing in analytics product. Analytics product is a good example of something that absolutely needs a control plane because it's so data intensive.
Right.
Oh, it got even more votes now. So I think the reason for the shift is that giving someone direct access to the data plane and just telling him run a bunch of queries directly on the database, have fun at it, which is basically still what, even with, I think Aurora serverless now added like, hey, I can run queries from a centralized place kind of thing. It's a slightly better, I think it's a better experience. But in general, the more you create like a high level experience on top of the stuff that actually deals with compute, and it's, I think you have you'll have a better user experience. And I think more and more this is something that the entire industry is focusing on. Thanks God, because this was absolutely not the case, I would say.
Oh, it used to be a nightmare, right? I mean, like the last thing that in the design of these various like analytics tools was who's going to use it and how, right? It was like, let's make it performant. Let's really think about all of those pieces. And then the end user is like, whoa, this is a bucket of parts. How do I put this together? How do I work through this functionally? Like those were big, big questions in the past.
Yeah, and what we found is that it's actually not hard to add the control plane to an existing system. Well, I would say that it's hard to build a control plane, like extremely hard and make it good. It's not hard to do the fit of a control plane on top of an existing system. Again, I think AWS is actually a good proof point, maybe, because you have a lot of different products. Clearly, somehow you manage to take all of them and fit in an experience on top. Yeah, I would say that usually what we see is that people already have amazing automation on the data plane. Like they have Kubernetes, they spin stuff up, they have Terraform, they have probably in your world you see cloud formations, AMIs, all those different things. What they really lacking is a way to tie it back from an SRE spinning up stuff to a user logs into my website, clicks, I want a new MySQL cluster, and a new MySQL cluster shows up. If and the usage metrics are collected back, so you have a nice graph with this is how much I used it. And I think this is at least a good first step toward, hey, I have a SaaS control plane. Like, and then like you want, okay, where do I manage access to this MySQL? Do I do it on the MySQL like I used to? Or do I do it via this one pane of glass kind of experience? Where do I run my queries? Where do I, like everything that you do? And then you can even think higher. Like if you see, since you have all those metrics, how much they use the database, can you give, if the person looking at the UI right now, is he a newbie or a very experienced person? Because you know exactly how much he used it. Can you give a different experience? And all this creating
suggest things, right?
very smart data architecture.
Right. We go back to the beginning, right, where you talk about those opinionated data architectures. Oh, that person's not very experienced. Maybe we can suggest something or suggest a different path, but we have that knowledge internalized then that we can kind of operationalize on it, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And what we think is that really the big problems in getting there is the user experience itself usually is made up of a lot of different components, right? Like the permissions, the billing, the graph, all that. So you need to kind of integrate it together in a way that makes sense. We feel like it comes back to actually the software architecture. It should not leak up, and it's a bit non-trivial to create the data in a way that each team will own the experience, but it will still all kind of look the same from API perspective.
Right.
And then just managing the events back and forth, control plane to data plane, back to control plane. Who is the real source of truth? What happens if they conflict? Who wins? How do you reconcile them? This is serious distributed systems and data problems. So they're an interesting thing to explore. if you are, I think, both data engineers and platform engineers. And honestly, today, the fact that data engineers and platform engineers are not the same people is kind of worrying, to be fair, because like, why is Kubernetes part of the platform, but data stores are not? Like,
yeah, and those are kind of the people silos,
like,
right?
so
Like those are
the data.
Yeah, and those are the people silos that we create, right?
It's the people silos, absolutely. Sometimes it's a very big org silos. Like sometimes I've seen data engineers not even report to the same org as the platform engineers. Like that's very difficult. And then it's also about best practices. I can start of seeing kind of flow of best practices. Infrastructure of code as code has been around for so long.
Yeah.
Right.
Data engineering as code. I think DBT are doing it, and maybe that's it. I haven't seen a lot of it. Why is it not the bigger thing?
Everything should be as code. I am a huge fan of everything as code. Your infrastructure, your governance, your data engineering, your configuration, all of those things should be as code. So,
and I think like, and if again going back to the data mesh that we talked about earlier, it basically sets up this set of requirements for what is being a data product means, and they mean both internal and external. But it says, okay, if you're a data product, it means you have to provide good APIs. It means that you have to provide security, governance, like you have all those things you need to provide. I don't think it's possible to provide that without having those engineering practices. Like you have to have everything in CI/CD, like in Git. You have to have a CI/CD. You have to automatically revert if you accidentally broke a pipeline, which means that everything have to get tested. So yeah, I think the world has to move there. I can see it moving there. I think it's doing it too slowly for my taste.
we have to get,
I love that.
We have to get there at some point. Absolutely. So, that's a good. Gwen, we're slowly running out of time. Any last thoughts you would recommend to up and coming builders, up and coming data engineers about control planes, data products? Anything you would suggest to them? Give them a piece of advice to take home from your presentation.
Start with who is going to use the product. What's the persona? And build that from there. Because if you don't understand them, you will not have good user experience. And you want your infrastructure to support a good user experience, not to have the only user experience that you could possibly build on the infrastructure that you somehow ended up with.
Yeah.
Got it. No, absolutely. I think starting with the customer, stuff we do here at AWS, working backwards, always understand who's going to be using your product, and that's a mistake we all make.
And that matters. That experience matters, right? Like make it as smooth as possible for adoption, for just a really good relationship with those customers. It's key.
We are lazy, and we are used to making things, using things that are easy.
Lazy divas.
Lazy divas. Yeah, we don't like friction, so you make sure it's frictionless. Excellent. Gwen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. As always.
Hey there! Thanks for checking out this video. Remember to give it a like and share with your community. Then hit subscribe and the bell for all the latest content that will help you build on AWS.